lowering interest rates. South Carolina Governor Mark Sanford says the bailout should stop right now, that more bailouts will only make the economy worse. He joins us now from the state's capital of Columbia. Governor, great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it. Well, I saw you yesterday speaking out. Of course, they gave you kind of short shrift because your message is not one that's well appreciated inside the Beltway these days. But you had a phrase, and I only caught part of it. I want you to expand on it. You said the best bailout of the American economy is an unfettered entrepreneur. What did you mean by that?
What I mean is that indeed that's the case. The ultimate in stimulus is people going out and working each day, starting a business, dreaming about starting a business, working within a business. And that silent majority are the people who begin to feel absolutely ripped off in this bailout psychology that we see emerging out of Washington, D.C. Because that average working person plays by the rules. They go indeed work a day for $1, worth of living. They don't buy too much house. They do all the things that go with trying to play by the rules, and yet it seems that the financial bad boys in many cases, whether it's automotive companies who made the wrong decisions, or states that took on too much debt and spent too much, or now the home building industry or the Wall Street, or go down the list, those are the folks getting bailed out. And so I think that we have a real problem in that you begin over time to move from a market-based economy with indeed entrepreneurs and working folks driving the economy to a politically based economy wherein Washington gets to pick winners and losers. And if we tap you, you're going to be all right. If you have the right lobbyist in Washington, or if you can make enough noise in Washington, you're going to be okay. But the rest of you are going to be holding the bag and, in fact, paying for the bailouts of others.
Well, and what worries a lot of our viewers is that the Treasury now has this power, as you said, to tap the winners and losers. The Treasury Department alone, because of the practically unlimited power that was given to them by Congress through the TARP plan, has this extraordinary power, and it's not a level playing field anymore.
It's not, and even more worrisome, though, is the whole idea of solving a problem that was created as a result of too much debt by adding yet more debt, I mean, just flat out doesn't make sense.
Right.
And yet that's what's happening. And we're getting to a critical juncture when you, frankly, begin to jeopardize the value of the dollar over the long run when you stack debt on top of debt on top of debt. And we borrowed $500 billion from the Chinese. We borrowed from Medicare. We borrowed from Social Security. We borrowed from our grandkids. And at some point, this house of cards begin to fall. And so you could have all the stimulus you want coming out of Washington, D.C., but if you begin to really hurt the value of the dollar, then, Katie bar the door with regard to what stimuluses come next.
Well, the worst example of what you just mentioned is when the Fed unveiled its $800 billion plan, one of its $800 billion plans to support the issuance of debt backed by small business debt. They were going to help out people who are already in debt with regard to the credit cards, get even more in debt. So it's so encouraging just the wrong kind of behavior among the population.
Yeah, I mean, here's an example of that. With all due respect to California, California's grown by about 95% over the last 10 years in terms of state government. Even the federal government has grown at a lower rate of growth, about 72%. And so what we're talking about is taxpayers across this country going to help and bail out a state that has spent at a rate even faster than the federal government. And that mirrors what's happening with some of the businesses that you were just alluding to. And you really begin to create a problem from the standpoint of why then should taxpayers in South Carolina hold the line on spending? Or why should folks in other states hold the line on spending if the net result of spending too much is you get taken care of by the federal government and taxpayers across this country?
Or why should I pay off my mortgage diligently if I go in default, I might get a bailout from the government and get a new mortgage rate of 4.5?
Yeah, I want to sign up for one of those too. I heard you just mention that in the program.
It's extraordinary. I mean, there's no limit to how these things will go. And one thing about the personal responsibility, which is critical, you mentioned it in a Wall Street Journal editorial that you wrote a couple of days ago, which you say the bailout mentality threatens America's sense of personal responsibility. I guess that's, when you think of the moral character of our country, that's what might be most harmful about all this.
It is, and that's the thing to really be watched over the long run. I mean, if avoiding a recession or avoiding a downturn was as easy as simply cutting a check out of Washington, D.C., we'd never have recessions because it's the easiest of all things to do. The fact of the matter is stimulating the economy is much more detailed, much more complicated than simply checks out of Washington, D.C., particularly when we don't have the money in Washington, D.C. We're going to have to borrow to take care of the problem. So what we've said is, you got to look at the issue of trade. You got to look at the issue of competitiveness. Something like this check card program, which would be disastrous for a lot of other businesses across the country. You got to look at the value of the dollar. You got to look at sustainability of spending. You got to look at a broad swath of things as opposed to what we've fallen into the trap of, which is simply thinking that Washington will rescue us. They'll just borrow a little bit more money, add to the pile of $53 trillion that's already there, and the problem will be taken care of. And what I think is particularly not believable about the approach in Washington is we've been hearing that for about a year now, as total stimulus this year went from a couple $100 billion to $2.3 trillion to now over $7 trillion in stimulus package, and yet Washington is still saying just give us a little bit more power, a little bit more authority, let's write a couple more checks, and we'll take care of this problem for you.
Right. Another trillion will do it. We heard that a lot. Governor, thank you very much for coming in. Good to hear you.
My pleasure. Take care.
Appreciate it.